Now, we have a little chit-chat about Belgium before the war, I think. That's right, John?
Yes.
The Crossley involvement with Belgium before the war. We're also going to, after that...
Music off!
Music off, right. We've also got a video for the children who might not be interested in Belgium before the war, I know that, which is next door in the front room. Right. Who's shouting their head off?
So what's the choice? You've got Belgium before the war in the other room.
Yeah. No, you've got Belgium in here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you've got some, like...
Private Sam.
What?
Oh, I'm going
Private
Sam.
Something Sam next door.
Something Sam next door, right.
Then we'll have a cup of tea.
Yeah.
With a bit of luck, we might be then have some reminiscing of John's tearing up and down the Himalayas or something or other. That's John Penton.
Oh,
We're not
right,
going to.
okay.
No, you're going to show some photographs then.
No, I haven't got the
And he hasn't got the... Well, that's all right then. John, it's all yours then. Right. With no problem.
I think we better sort of...
We'll sort out the background.
Yeah, I think
Start
we'll
off
sort out
with.
the background.
Who's getting their heads off? Which one's that?
So it's little Benny's with me.
Oh, it's little Ben. Little Ben. It's all right. Take no notice, John Crossley. It's little Ben.
Oh.
It's under control. He's with his mother, Margaret Ann.
He's just choking.
Just choking, that's all.
Oh, I see. It's only more useful there than here.
No, it's all under control. So if Ginny will get out of the chair, John can sit in the chair.
Yes.
Right. That's yours. That's it.
I won't sit down at all. I'll stand up here. There we are.
Oh, well, that's right. I can sit there then. That's
Yeah.
it. Right, beep, beep.
Complete chaos.
Chaos. Is somebody taking a photograph and the photograph are getting organised?
Hope not.
Right.
Right.
Are you sitting comfortably?
Yes, yeah. The child hanging at this thing.
You're all right? Good. That's fine.
It's heavy
I'm
here.
finished. Good. Anyway, no, Rod.
Ah.
Pink room.
Pink room. In the front, on the left.
Right. Now, Rod suddenly remembered that there were fewer and fewer of us left who could remember Martu. And so he asked me if I could remind a few of the people who might even be interested in Martu what it was and where when we went there. Now, Martu is in fact just the name of a village which lies about 3 kilometres south of Spa in eastern Belgium. But we talk about Martu because it was there that our grandparents, our Belgian grandparents, had a house, a very nice cottage with roses around the door and that sort of thing. And they moved in, they bought the house in about 1909, and they stayed there until halfway through the war, when they escaped from Belgium and came to England, and the result you see before you to some extent.
That's the 1418 war, isn't it, John?
Not the last.
Yes, well, it was the Great War. It was 1909.
1418 war.
They've done history.
Yes.
1909. Yeah. So anyway, they came over to England in the Great War, and two of their daughters married two Yorkshiremen, and Rod was the result of one marriage, and I was the result of the other. And the third daughter never married, and she became a teacher of dancing. Now, I've got some photographs here of the cottage, which you can pass round. You'll see it's really rather nice. And you'll also see there the people at my parents' wedding. They were married at the cottage in 1921. Now, I'll be very brief because after the war, after I was born in 1923, we used to go to Belgium with our mothers every year for the summer, and Rod used to come, and Poppy, who was, of course, Poppy's, Roddy's sister. And Rod just wanted me to tell you what it was like there, really, in between the wars, and to some extent a bit since the war, because since the war, Dorothy and I have stayed there until 1960, when grandfather, we called Bonpapa, he died, and the cottage was sold, and my grandmother, who we called Munna, went to live with her unmarried daughter in Liège. Now, I was really trying to think who would remember Marto. Certainly Rod, obviously. Rod and I stayed there every summer before the war. And I think, Peter, you must have been there, mustn't you, Peter? Did you ever stay there?
I don't remember staying there. I
Since
remember
the
staying
war?
at Miquette's
At
house in
Miquette's,
Liège,
yes.
and then I can remember making
Visited,
visits to
Marto.
Marto and playing with the little boy next door.
That's
There's a
right.
stream at the bottom of the garden.
That's right,
yes.
that's right. And I should think that probably Jilly's been, has she? I don't know.
I went.
I took you there and showed you to you, yes.
Because it was sold in 1960, so you,
Yeah,
perhaps you went...
Before that, we must have gone before him,
Yeah,
Yes,
with my brother chaperoning.
that's right, yes.
that's right, good.
And I might tell you that at the time we had a little,
I think that's probably about
I think it was a Riley 1.5, which we borrowed, which belonged to Anne's dad, and and Anne was driving it. And just outside Marto, there was a very sharp bend which went underneath a railway bridge.
That's right.
And Anne was driving, and she just took off on as if she was driving in England, with her
Right.
brother and me screaming at her as she went round this blind
Oh no,
bend
keep
on the
left.
wrong side of the road.
And it's the left-hand twist.
Yes, a left-hand bend. She went and took it on the inside, where there'd be umpteen accidents
Yeah.
we know of, where people have been killed and God knows what, with us screaming at Anne, in actual fact. I remember that.
Yeah.
But Anne didn't speak to me for days afterwards.
And probably as you've held it against her to this very day, she probably praised you for
Well,
nothing.
no, she hasn't spoken to me since, actually.
It's up in every conversation.
The only mistake you ever made driving, that's probably it.
It did frighten us, actually.
Yes.
I can imagine it's a very dangerous
It
bend.
was a very
And
dangerous bend,
It
yes.
is because of this dangerous bend that they straightened out the bend and took the road straight through the garden of the cottage and
Yeah.
ruined it.
Right.
Anyway, Dorothy and I first went there in '49 on the motorbike, and we had tea with Wolfgang Munna, and we had just come back from the Hotel Val de Chêne at Pamuski, which you may remember of.
Yes.
You should remember it.
Yes, I remember that, yes.
They were on their honeymoon. He's a bit vague about it. Sure, still. Anyway, now, every summer, Rod and Poppy and I went with our mothers to Marto, and the very first time I went, I was 7 months old. And since Mother travelled alone with me, and it involved going by train from Manchester to Dover,
Yeah.
catching the ferry from Dover to Ostend, spending the night in Ostend, and then carrying on with me at 7 months on my train all the way to Marto, and this was before the days of Pampers, so I think Mother did very well. And anyway, we used to go there every summer, and it was very nice. The cottage had a big garden behind it with greengage trees, apple trees and pear trees in an orchard, and then down one side of the garden there was a fantastic vegetable garden where they grew the most marvellous red, white and black currants and strawberries and things. And I think the success of that part of the garden was due to it was just below the cesspit, which had to be emptied every winter, which was done on the garden. But we didn't eat them until the summer, so that was all right. And then on the left-hand side there was a lovely flower garden, and at the bottom there was a lawn, and on the lawn was a summer house, and behind that there was a river, which was just big enough, it's really a stream, but it was just big enough to have a little boat on, which we did. In fact, there's a picture of the boat there. And every morning, I remember, we had to go and get the milk from the farm, and my grandmother always boiled the milk as soon as she got it home to stop it going sour. But I always thought that probably saved us from having our cervical glands swelling up because of bovine tuberculosis. But anyway, I was very grateful that the milk was always boiled. And then I remember that the local milkman used to lend us his horse, that he pulled his horse and cart with, and we used to go riding in the woods on that, but he hadn't got a saddle, so we had to ride bareback and with just a rope as a bridle, but nobody came to any great harm. And this went on as we got older. We used to go to Spa, which was about 3 kilometres up the road, where there was a lovely park with pigeons and things like that. And I do remember on one occasion, when I was about 3 or 4, as a special treat, they had these goat carts in the park. Do you remember those, Rod? And with a goat carrying the little cart, and you would take them around the park. And for a special treat, I was told that instead of having to walk this 3 kilometres down this very long straight avenue, if it had been bending, it wouldn't have mattered. It was dead straight. And instead of walking down, they would let me have a goat cart, and I would sit in this goat cart, and I was taken down the Avenue du Marteau, sitting there. You see, well, I remember some things stick in your mind, because I was sitting there. It was the only time I was ever taken in the goat cart, and the goat was trotting along in front, and I was sitting behind, and all I could see, I remember, was the goat's backside and the trees on either side. And I sat looking at the goat's backside practically till we got to Marteau, and I suddenly said, "What's that little hole?" Well, so Mother Auntie Molly would constantly say, "Oh, it's from side, from side, and all that, you see." And I remember the woman leading the goat cart turned around and said, "Everybody has one," and carried on. So
Quite right.
So my first bit of anatomy that I learned there. But and then the other things we used to do, we used to go to there's a swimming pool in the other side of the town, the other side of Spa, where we. I remember there was a special treat sometimes. We used to go in a Citroën taxi, and the Citroën are going bankrupt about 1930, and they saved the situation. They got a whole load of very old-fashioned cars they couldn't sell, so they started a taxi service, and it was called the Citroën, and it was the first time, I suppose it was the minicab of its day, because for the first time people could afford taxis. We used to go, as a special treat again, we used to go to the swimming pool in the Citroën. Now, my grandparents were there until this last war, and then they, of course, now I forgot to mention, yes, I'll go into a bit more than that, a bit like the cottage. When you got to the cottage, you entered it through some garage doors, and in the little garage was a superb 4-cylinder FN motorcycle and sidecar, which our grandfather bought in 1923, and which he rode till he died in 1960, or till the year before anyway, and on the same motorbike and sidecar. And before the war, he came with Munana, the grandmother, to Manchester, her in the sidecar and their luggage on the back, and they drove all the way to Manchester. I remember he arrived at our house in a great state and said, "I have just been pursued by a police car, but I managed to outpace him." And the sight of these two sort of roaring through this motorcycle and sidecar. And then again, you see, the motorcycle and sidecar, when they tried to escape from Belgium, when the Germans occupied Belgium in 1940, they tried to escape to come to England and join us, and they went from port to port trying to get a ship to England, but they couldn't get one, and they got as far as Bordeaux when Bonpapa fell asleep and hit a telegraph pole and broke his patella. And this was, so often in life, I find a blessing in disguise, because he being injured, he was taken into a convent where he was looked after by the nuns, he and my grandmother and my Aunt Miquette, and they were there for 6 months. And after 6 months, they decided to go back to Belgium, and they went up in a cattle truck. They got to Belgium, and the interesting thing is that when they got back to the cottage, the Germans had requisitioned it, but they'd made a very good inventory of everything in the cottage, and there wasn't a single thing missing apart from the bed linen, which had been stolen by their neighbour, Monsieur Bertrand, who had a little hotel. So, but the Germans were all right. And incidentally...
Did they get it back?
Hmm?
Did they get it back from Bertrand?
I don't know about that. And I'm jumping about a bit as things come back to my mind, you know. And of course, in the First War, when they escaped, in the First War, as all you all know, Belgium was occupied by the Germans, but Holland was neutral. and so they were able to get out of Belgium. At least my grandmother and her 3 daughters were allowed to get out of Belgium, which they did by tram, to Maastricht. But my grandfather, being of course of military age, he had to stop in Belgium, but in fact he decided to escape under the wire and agreed to meet my grandmother and the 3 girls in Maastricht the following morning at 10 o'clock. And he sort of climbed under the barbed wire, and my grandmother had a rather anxious time waiting for him. But anyway, he got out, and that's when they came to England. And you think of anything else that used to happen? Oh yes, once a year we used to do the promenade de crêpe, which is a sort of institution. We used to set off from the cottage through the woods at the bottom of the garden and over the moors to a little village called Crêpe, where there was a cafe where the woman there made the most fantastic drinking chocolate, and I can still see her there making it by just getting a block of plain chocolate and a pan of boiling milk and a great lot of sugar, and she just broke the chocolate and put it in the milk and stirred it up and added the sugar, and it was the best drinking chocolate you've ever had. The Crêpe is still there, but I very much doubt if the cafe is there now, and if it is, it probably uses Cadbury's or Roundtree's or something. And
Who used to go on? 'Cause I remember going on those trips, but I can't remember where we finished up, who used to go on them. But there used to be a whole tribe who used to go, wasn't there?
yeah,
There used to be the cousins.
Yes, and Miquette's friends used to come, and it was
There's
quite an
Constant
excursion.
used to come as well, and all that
Yes.
lot. But in addition to that, there was Auchan. Didn't he used to come?
Yes,
A few of
I think
those
there's a
in
photo
Vivian.
of him in one of in the book somewhere, on Jean. But yes, and then again, when you went into the cottage through the garage, you saw this wonderful motorbike, and then you turned left into the kitchen, and there was only a cold water tap and a sink. There was no running hot water. But I still remember, under the sink there was a water meter, and that was 60 years ago. So people who moan nowadays about water meters, you know, they were there in Belgium 60 years ago. And then of course there was my grandparents' bedroom was on the right on the ground floor, and
With a big feather bed.
yes, big feather bed. And then opposite there was a living room where there was the clock that stands in the
That's
hall.
right, yes.
That clock was there.
And also they used to have the African.
The African things on the wall.
Oh, we've
That's
still got some stuff.
Yes. And when you went upstairs, there were three bedrooms where, of course, you had to wash with a jug and basin. But because they'd got a water meter, of course, when you finished with the water, you poured it into the baskets outside the window box.
Yes.
How did he get the motorbike back after the Bordeaux?
Oh, yes. Well, there
They were in
again.
the com 6 months and went up in a cattle truck.
That's right. Came at the end of the war. My grandfather, our grandfather, wrote to the garage where he left the motorcycle and said, "Have you still got it?" And they said, "Oh yes, we've still got it. If you just send us the fare for the train, we'll send it up." And that's how it came back. What else we thought about? The motorbike.
What sort of a man was Bonpin, John?
What sort?
Yeah, what sort of a man? What did he do in life?
Oh, well, he started life as working on the railway in the Belgian Congo. You knew that, didn't you?
Only vaguely.
Oh, well, you ought to know this. Well, I mean, we're not going to deal with Mauto now, we're going to deal with what goes before, but he worked in the Belgian Congo, well, of course, it gets very complicated now. Of course, he wasn't really our grandfather, you probably know that.
No, was he his mum now? Was your real grandmother's sister?
I thought you all knew this. I better start again. Anyway, no. Our grandfather was in fact Swiss, and his name was Emil Whitwer. And he came to Belgium to work in a girls' school. And working in the girls' school was a teacher called Jean-Claude, who he married. And they were our grandparents.
Oh.
And
And he was a great athlete.
he was the pole vaulting champion
Yes.
of Switzerland.
Because I had a silver medal from him, which he won in the 1900 European
Games. Very likely, yes. So then you
Still
see,
got it.
so
Yes, I've still got it, yes.
Gold one.
So
got
the,
pinched.
Emile Whitware and Jean Claude got married and had 3 daughters, one of which was Rod's mother and one of which was mine, of course. And then he died at the age of 32, leaving our grandmother destitute. She had nothing. She got no help from anybody. There was no social security, of course, in those days. So she took in washing and that sort of thing to rear these 3 children, 3 girls. And then one day she was on the train going from Antwerp to Brussels, and she met Bon Papa, who was coming on leave from the Congo. And they got friendly, and eventually, to cut a long story short, she invited him to tea, and she bought a Limoges tea service to entertain him, and we've still got it. And anyway, it worked, and they got married. So now we've got a step-grandfather and a grandmother. But she, unfortunately, became ill after only 3 or 4 years of marriage, and she died very quickly in 3 days. And on her deathbed, she called her sister in, who was unmarried, and said, "Would you marry Auguste, so that my 3 daughters will at least have a blood relation as a mother?" And so they got married. Bonpin and Mouna got married. But in fact, as I say, although we always call them our grandparents, he was our step-grandfather, and she was a great-aunt. And that was the story there. And now where should we go from there? Going to Belgium, I remember, coming back from Belgium, we were there the last, in August 1939, and I'd gone youth hosteling and joined Mother in Belgium, where Rod was, and Poppy, and Auntie Molly, and I got back there, and of course we're getting very worried because the war was about to break out. And I remember Mother asking me to go to Mr. Bertrand, again, Mr. Bertrand's hotel, to ring up the embassy to find out if it was time to leave Belgium, or was there going to be a war. And I always remember Mother telling me, she said, "You better go and ring up, because with an English accent, they'll listen to you." You know, in those days, it still was something to have a British accent, really. And I remember that we rang the embassy, and they said, "Oh yes, you better go home." And so we set off in your mother's car,
Yes.
and with Poppy and you and me and the 2, Mother and your mother, and we drove back to Taunton, and the war broke out about 3 days later.
Before that, I remember arriving at Ostend with the car, and we were waiting at the station basically to get on the plane and to get on the boat, I should say, and what have you. And there was a train load which had come from England of Germans who were going back to Germany, and on the other side of the platform you had the English which were going back to England.
Yes.
And I remember the sort of the hoo-ha which was going on between the 2 groups of that. And I also remember that we talk about now going to France by just driving onto a cattle truck and underneath the tunnel. But I remember in those days we used to go and get a crane which used to put 4 pieces of rope down, and they'd put that underneath each wheel of the car, and then you just haul the car up in the air and swing it across and drop it down on the deck of the boat.
No Roros.
No Rolos, those are very safe.
No Roros.
Much safer.
Much safer. And you'd strap the car down on the deck of the boat, in effect. But most people used to come on what's called the boat trains, didn't they?
Yeah.
Because there weren't many cars around.
Yeah. And I don't know, when you used to come down on the train to Dover, I remember Mother used to look out of the window as soon as we could see the sea, and she'd say, "Can you see any mouton blanc?"
Oh yes.
Now, why did she worry about mouton blanc?
The white horses.
The white sheep, in fact. We think in France it's a white sheep, and in England the white horses. And if they were mouton blanc, then she was very worried, but no stabilisers, you know. Now, I'll finish really. I brought this book, not because it's got these mainly sort of our family photographs, they won't interest you, but I thought you might be interested I found the menu for my parents' wedding breakfast. They were married at the from and at the cottage. I think most of you've seen the cottage by now. Has the book gone round or have you finished it? Oh, good, yes. So they were married from the cottage, and of course the wedding party is on the front page of the book. And how they managed to do this wedding breakfast at the cottage, which only had a small coal stove, I don't know. But I'll pass this round, but I'll read it out to you. They started off with potage crème valoise, which was, I suppose, I don't know what crème valoise is, it's soup, but what sort of soup, I don't know. And then a corbeille, a basket dauphiné. Well, dauphiné probably means potato. Why they had a basket of potatoes, I don't know.
Chips in a basket. Chips in a basket.
That's right. Then they had turbot à l'hollandaise.
That was really with the sort of the hollandaise,
That with the fish
sort of
course.
sauce, isn't it?
Yes. And then pomme persillée with the turbot. Then filet de bœuf sauce Godard with celery à la Pompadour, followed by poulet rôti, various compotes, jambon d'Ardenne,
Yes.
cœur de lettuce, heart of the lettuce, and then a pièce montée, which I think was what they used for a wedding cake, fruits and dessert. But that's not a bad wedding breakfast, really. It should be done on one coal stove in a cottage. But when Rod said, would I do this, I sort of sat down and thought, well, I'll just write just one or two things I can vaguely remember about it. And of course, once you start, it all comes back. And there's quite a bit more that I haven't told you about, I've probably forgotten about. And so, I eventually gave up halfway through.
Oh, John.
Just a minute.
Yeah.
But what I shall do, I shall carry on till it's all done.
Right.
And then anybody who's interested can have a photocopy, which is at least be in the archives of the family, as you might say. So that's really all there is to it. One day perhaps you might go to Belgium and go to Marteau, but I'm afraid, although the cottage is still there, it has been totally ruined because of this Englishwoman who, you know, causes chaos under the railway bridge. And so they've taken the main road now goes right through this beautiful garden. So the front of the house is now the back of the house, and it's all, I'm told, ruined. And I've been told not to go to be too.
Don't go there, John.
No, I've heard.
We went back and I was horrified.
Yeah.
And what horrified me even more was the little stream which we used to play in 1939. And we used to tickle the trout. You were very good at that.
Trout. We used to catch
Yes.
trout in it. Yes.
It was polluted unbelievably with virtually straight sewage.
Yeah.
You wouldn't believe
And
it,
yet we used
actually.
to swim in it, and
We used to do
have a boat
everything
in
and
it,
collect-
and
yeah.
tickle trout in it.
Yeah.
And it still
And-
came through Spa. There was no.
I know.
But it just shows.
But the point was, there was no, most of the places did not have flush toilets.
No.
They used to
Yeah.
recycle everything and it didn't pollute the watercourses.
Right.
And they got modernised and put in flush toilets and ruined the whole system.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh well, there we are. Now, I hope you'll go one day. Now, those who want it can have one of these anyway.
Thank you very much, John.
Do we know of any Belgian relations still out there that you keep in touch with?
No, the only relation left is Stefan, who was a cousin, who might well still be alive. They have no idea where he is.